My name is Chinelo Madu, the only daughter of my parents. We lived in a small village called Obolo, where life was simple and hard at the same time. My father was a farmer. Every morning before the sun rose, we would go to the farm with our hoes and baskets. My mother would tie her wrapper tight and carry food for us, yam and palm oil in a small cooler. Even though we didn't have much, my parents were happy people. My father always told me, Chinelo, education will remove this poverty from our family. Those words were the reason I kept going to school, even when I had to trek almost an hour each way. I wanted to become a teacher, to make my parents proud, to show that a poor man's daughter could still rise. One evening, rain had fallen while I was still coming back from school. The red mud stuck to my slippers. The road was empty. Only the sound of frogs and the croaking of toads filled the air. I held my school bag tight and tried to hurry home. Then I heard a car stop behind me. It was a black Prado Jeep. Everybody in Obalo knew that car. It belonged to Chief Uwakwe's son, Kene, the boy who always wore gold chain and dark glasses even in church. He was the kind of person people feared, not because he was strong, but because his father was powerful. He wound down his glass and said, "Fine, girl, come let me drop you." I refused. I said I was fine, that my house was close. But before I could move, he came down from the car. His smile disappeared. His eyes were cold. He grabbed my arm. I screamed, but the road was empty and the rain had started again. That night changed my life. I don't remember everything that happened, just the pain, the struggle, and how he pushed me to the ground and covered my mouth. When it was over, he cleaned his hands, told me not to tell anyone, and drove off like nothing happened. I walked home slowly, shaking. My uniform was torn. My leg was bleeding. When my mother saw me, she screamed. My father's face went dark. The next morning, he took me to the police station, but the policeman only laughed and said, "You people don't know who you're talking about. Go home before you bring trouble on yourself." We went home broken. My mother cried every day until her eyes swelled. My father sat in silence. People in the village started talking. Some said I followed him willingly. Others said I wanted his money. I stopped going to school. My dream of being a teacher died before it even started. That was the day my childhood ended. And I promised myself, one day I would make the world hear my voice. When my father saw that the police would do nothing, he decided we had to leave Obolo. My mother had stopped talking. Every day she sat by the window, staring at nothing. People had turned us into gossip. That in the market, women would whisper when they saw me. I hated going out. I hated my life. So one morning, we packed our small bags and left for Enugu, where my mother's sister lived. Her name was Auntie Ifeoma, a tailor who worked in front of her one-room apartment. Life in Enugu was noisy, different from the quiet of our village. The streets were full of people and smoke from suya stands. But even in that new place, I carried my pain like a shadow that refused to leave. Auntie Ifeoma tried to help me forget. She encouraged me to continue school. At first, I refused. I said I didn't want to see people, but one evening, she sat beside me and said softly, "Chinelo, you can't let one bad person destroy your whole life. If you hide forever, he wins." Those words stayed in my heart. I started night classes, sitting at the back where no one could notice me. Slowly, I began to feel alive again. I read every book I could find, especially newspapers. I loved reading stories about brave people who spoke the truth even when it was dangerous. Sometimes I imagined myself writing stories too, using my words to fight for people who had no one to speak for them. After secondary school, I got a small job at a radio station as an assistant. My job was to bring files, fetch water, and help presenters arrange their papers. I was shy, but I loved listening to them talk on air. They spoke with confidence, as if their voices could change the world. I wanted that. One day, the main presenter didn't come to work, and our boss asked me to read the evening news. My hands were shaking. But as soon as I started reading, something strange happened. I felt peace. My voice was clear, steady, and people in the office were surprised. That was the day I realized. My voice was my weapon. From that moment, I worked harder. I went for journalism training and started reporting for the station. I covered stories about corruption, poor farmers, and women who were treated unfairly. I wanted to give them the voice I didn't have back then. Years passed. I became known as the girl who was not afraid to speak truth. But I never told anyone about what happened in Obolo. It was my secret, buried deep inside. Then one morning, my editor walked into the office and said, "Chinelo, we have a big story for you. There's a new senatorial candidate from Nsukka Zone. Chief Uwakwe's son. You'll be the one to interview him." The room started spinning. My chest became tight. The name I had spent years trying to forget had found me again. That was the day I realized. The past does not stay buried forever. When my editor mentioned the name Kene Uwakwe, it was like my heart forgot how to beat. I stared at him, hoping he would laugh and say it was a joke. But he didn't. He just kept talking about how this interview would boost the station's image. I wanted to say no. My mouth opened, but no words came out. How could I tell him that the man he was praising once destroyed my life? I just nodded and left his office quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Keen's face the way it was that evening years ago. Proud, wicked, and full of arrogance. I thought I had buried that memory. I thought I had healed. But now it came back like a wound that never really closed. I sat by my small window and watched the city lights blinking in the dark. I asked myself, can I face him? Can I look at him without breaking down? But another voice inside me whispered, you must. This is your moment. The next morning, I went to work early and began my research. I read everything I could find about him. His education abroad, his charity foundation, his smiling pictures with children, his speeches about helping the poor. People called him the people's voice. I almost laughed. The same man who once silenced me was now standing before the whole country pretending to care. As I read, anger started to replace fear. I promised myself that this interview would not be just another political show. I would make him face what he did, even if I had to look straight into his eyes to do it. The day of the interview came faster than I expected. I wore a simple blue gown, tied my hair neatly, and applied small powder on my face. My hands were shaking as I held my script. The makeup artist asked if I was nervous. I smiled and said, just a little. When Keen walked into the studio, my heart stopped. Time slowed down. He was taller now, dressed in white native with red cap, looking calm and powerful. He smiled at everyone as if he owned the place. Then his eyes met mine. For a moment, nothing else existed. I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes, then it disappeared. He stretched his hand to greet me, but I didn't take it. I only said, "Good afternoon, sir. Please have your seat." The cameras were about to roll. My heart was beating loud, but my face remained calm. The producer gave me the signal. 3, 2, 1, we are live. I took a deep breath, looked straight at the man who once broke me, and began. Open quote. Good evening, dear listeners. My name is Chinelo Madu, and tonight we have with us the man many call the hope of Nsukka Zone, Honorable Kene Uwakwe. Close quote. He smiled proudly, but I was no longer the frightened girl from Obolo. I was the woman who had found her voice. And this time, I was not afraid to use it. The interview started like every other political talk show I had ever done. My voice was calm. My questions were straight. I asked him about his plans for education, healthcare, and youth development. He smiled, speaking with sweet confidence. Everyone in the studio nodded, impressed. But inside me, my blood was boiling. Every time he said words like justice or change, I wanted to laugh out loud. I could almost hear that small girl inside me crying again. Then I decided, no more pretending. I dropped my pen on the table and leaned closer to the microphone. Open quote. Honorable, I said slowly. Many people say true leadership starts with truth. So let me ask you directly. Have you ever done something you regret? Something that would make people question your character? Close quote. He smiled that fake smile politicians use when they want to escape. Open quote. Everyone makes mistakes, Miss Chinelo, he said, but my record is clean. Close quote. I looked straight into his eyes and continued. Open quote. Would you apologize, even today, if the person you once hurt was sitting right here with you? Close quote. The whole room went silent. The camera light blinked red. Keen's face changed. He blinked fast, his lips pressed together. The producer gave me a warning sign from behind the glass, but I didn't care. He shifted in his seat. I don't understand what you mean, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Open quote. You do, I replied softly. Some wounds don't disappear, Honorable. Some people carry them for years. Close quote. He looked at me again, and that was when I saw it, the flash of fear in his eyes. He recognized me. His hand began to tremble. He forced a smile, then said, "This interview is over." But before he could remove his microphone, I spoke again, calm and strong. Open quote, "You may walk away, but remember, truth always finds its voice." Close quote. He stormed out of the studio. Cameras were still rolling. The producers panicked, but I ended the program properly. Open quote. "Dear listeners, that was Honorable Kene Uwakwe, candidate for Senate. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Thank you for staying with us." Close quote. When the cameras went off, the whole studio went cold. No one spoke. My colleagues looked at me as if I had done something dangerous, and maybe I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone kept buzzing. Some people were praising me for being bold. Others said I was finished. By morning, the interview had gone viral. People were sharing clips online asking questions. What did she mean? Who is this Chinelo girl? Then the calls started coming. Strange numbers, deep voices warning me to mind my business. I looked out the window and felt my heart beating fast, but I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt alive. For the first time in my life, I had faced my past, and it was afraid of me. After that interview, my life changed completely. The next morning, the whole country was talking about me. Some called me brave, others said I was foolish. My boss was scared. He called me into his office and said, "Chinelo, do you know who you just embarrassed on live TV? They can destroy this station." I told him quietly, "Sir, the truth has already been destroyed too many times. Let me rebuild it." But deep down, I was scared. The calls didn't stop. Strange cars began to park outside my house at night. One evening, I came home and found my door slightly open. I knew someone had been there. I didn't cry. I was tired of fear. So instead of hiding, I started digging. I went to old police stations, searched through dusty files, and begged people to speak. Many refused, saying the Uwakwes were too powerful. But one retired sergeant agreed to see me. He was old and sick. When I told him my name, his eyes filled with tears. Open quote, "I remember your case," he said weakly. "Your father begged us to help you, but we were paid to keep quiet. I've carried that shame all these years." Close quote. He gave me a small brown envelope full of old documents, evidence that showed the police report and the bribe that followed. My hands were shaking as I held it. That night, I wrote the story of my life and titled it "The Untold Crimes of a Rising Politician." It was long, painful, and true. I didn't use big grammar. I just told it the way it happened. A poor farmer's daughter, a corrupt system, and a man who thought power could erase sin. When I published it online, it spread like wildfire. People were angry. Other women came out, telling their own stories. Kini tried to deny everything, but the proof was too clear. His campaign scattered. Sponsors withdrew. Posters were torn down. Then one night, my father called. His voice was weak. Open quote, "Chinelo, they came for me," he said. "Don't stop. Let the truth speak." Close quote. We rushed him to the hospital. He survived, but that moment broke something inside me and healed something too. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every woman whose voice was buried by fear. A few weeks later, Election Day came. Keane lost badly. The whole state rejected him. Not long after, he disappeared from the country. One morning, I went to my mother's grave with flowers. I knelt down and whispered, open quote, "Mama, they tried to silence us, but we spoke, and the world listened." Close quote. Now, I run a small foundation that helps women tell their stories. Every week, I go on radio and remind people that truth is not noise. It is power. When I sit behind the microphone, I no longer feel small. I feel strong. Because the same voice they tried to silence became the one that brought justice. My name is Chinelo Madu, and this is how I found my voice again.